So we are very proud to have someone from someone who is researching about social light and coming from London to us. And I think it will be the best, Don, if you introduce yourself, what your fields of work are, and then going on with the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for bringing me over here. It's been a really interesting event already, and I'm looking forward to another day of it. Thank you also, everyone, for your stamina in still being here, okay? And I'll try not to put you to sleep at this point. Also, I cannot resist saying I'm especially grateful for the invitation, not just because it's a really interesting event, but these might be my last few weeks as a European. So it's delightful to be able to spend a few of those days in Europe, okay? Not least in Germany. Anyway, on that party political note, I'm going to approach some of the questions of this conference from my position as a sociologist, okay? I feel myself to be a caretaker of the social and want to contribute some idea of what we mean by the social. I'm going to do that in a slightly oblique way. I'm not going to give you definitions or anything, but to use a couple of or three actually, if I have time, of our research projects, recent research projects, in order to flesh out and explore some of the things that we mean by the social. As a research group, I'll say something about that in a moment, we recently published a paper which I quite love our own title. Sometimes you like them, sometimes you don't. It's called Making Space for the Social in Urban Lighting. And that's really what I want to talk about here. What shape do we give the social within lighting design practices, lighting professions like planning and so on? What does the social look like in the ways in which we go about doing urban lighting? What sort of social shaped spaces do we make in lighting? This comes out of a little research group that I've got at the London School of Economics. And just to clarify, I am not an economist. I am a sociologist. When people hear the LSE, they tend to assume. We started about 5 years ago, and we have basically two aims in life, professional life. We think of light as a material, a stuff, which is shaped by various people, both professional and people in the world itself. And our job is to investigate as sociologists how light is socially shaped and how light plays a part in shaping our social life. That's a hair trigger here. We're also, secondly, committed to working with lighting professionals. So a lot of what we do is explore the ways in which social research and lighting design and planning can work together. How to provide a better social knowledge base for lighting work, but also to see how lighting design practices can change our work as sociologists. It works both ways. So, for example, one of our long-term projects or programs has been workshops, which we hold with lighting professionals and lighting students, depends, in various places around the world in which we can get lighting people to go out and do social research so they can understand a place and then develop lighting strategies in relation to them. Anyway, our cast list is up there. Myself, Elettra Bordenaro, who's an architect and lighting designer and one of the founders of the kind of social light movement, and Joanne Entwistle, who's another sociologist at King's College London. This is a talk in, I suppose, two parts. The first, which come out of some of the recent work we've done. And I should stress that you're getting material which is kind of hot off the press. These are all projects which we haven't finished yet, so I haven't entirely digested what we're doing with them. This is what they look like at this point. The first part is a project called Pathways to Municipal Smart Lighting. which is a research partnership with Lucy, if people know, the network of lighting professionals and manufacturers in 70 different cities around the world. It's a very rich and exciting network. It's been a very good partnership and allowed us to, as academics, to, I hate the word, but it really is very useful, to leverage Lucy's network. To basically go out to a considerable range of cities, or lighting professionals in cities, not just in Europe, but around the world. I think we've covered, in a reasonable amount of depth, every continent, and carry out surveys and interviews with lighting professionals in this diversity of cities, not just geographically spread, but also different sizes, different levels of resource, and different, as it were, levels of engagement, let's say, with smart lighting. We carried out we have an online survey where we've asked lighting professionals to kind of answer a range of questions about what they mean by smart, their plans and strategies for dealing with it, their approaches to things like citizen participation and how people might get involved in this, and privacy issues. So it's quite a broad range of things, which we then followed up and are continuing to do. This is where it's still going. To do more in-depth interviews with people in these different cities to get at their views. The question that we started with, or were asked to start with, is what is smart lighting? And it's really, really clear that it would be inappropriate for us to define smart lighting. The whole point is to get the diversity of things that people might mean by it, to see what kind of idea of smart is emerging from different kinds of practices around the world. We've also tried to keep away from any of the kind of headline definitions of smart that you get in public statements and public speeches. We're trying to get at how do people work with these kinds of concepts. I don't know whether this is a term which means anything to anyone who's not of my generation, but we talked in a group of actually existing smart. We talk about actually existing socialism, okay? Let's say not the socialism or the smart that's dreamed up in kind of theoretical tomes, but what is actually coming out of the way in which people perform the concept, okay? One of the first things we found was that, I mean, obviously smart is a very weird term, which everyone is skeptical and cynical about, so I can just, we put the word smart in what's called in English scare quotes, okay? Deep irony. Okay? And we found that in, let's say, oh, everyone's using the term, but we don't believe in it, okay? In the surveys and interviews, as we put it, the word smart is pronounced something like that, okay, with smart, okay? Which is also apparent in the range of other words that people use. We've heard people talk about intelligent, lighting informed, responsive, creative, responsible, human-centered, and one of my colleagues I'll say it in Eindhoven, came up with wise lighting, okay? All of which are speaking to the ways in which light and lighting technologies should or could be more informed by knowledge of spatial and social practices in cities, I think. Anyway, I'm now going to add to the list dynamic, okay? I'm also not going to go into trying to define any difference between smart and dynamic. I can imagine, as I've been sitting here, I've been imagining some. But I'll just leave that for the moment and just let's enjoy our terminological confusions and just listen to what cities have to say. Having said that there is a range of different views of smart, and I'll go a bit further into that in a moment, there's a certain kind of sense of smartness, which I think works for dynamic lighting in many ways, that interviewees and survey people keep returning to. And it's some idea that there are increasingly ubiquitous data flows out there in the city, ways in which the city is producing information about itself. There are control systems which can be responsive to that data, can use it and process it and mediate it in various ways. And there is a technology, LED, which it can be controlled by that kind of mediation. All of that should translate into what could be talked of as the real-time responsiveness of infrastructures to socio-spatial processes. That translation being accomplished through information. However, that definition breaks down very, very quickly in people's talk about smart. One can challenge the idea of real time. There's a lot of talk of real time, and there's a kind of sense that, oh, this is great, if we can make our lights simply respond to an information flow like a motion sensor, then we don't have to think anymore, okay? It just does it automatically. At the same time, the actual uses of the information, some of the possibilities for relating light to information are much more extensive. That's to say, are we able to develop deeper data, for example, using that kind of information, not to make the lights respond immediately, but to develop much more complex analyses of urban life at night. A few cities are getting fairly advanced with that. Paris is one of them. What should I be pointing at? It became rapidly apparent that most smart lighting has nothing to do with light at all, and that's become a problem for the lighting departments of most cities. That's to say, it's simply that there are masts, lighting masts throughout the city, and people keep sticking their sensors on them, okay, which causes endless headaches. But the idea that the smartness of a light mast has to do with smart lighting or dynamic lighting is something that has to be thought through very, very carefully. There might be other ways in which light is being merged with other infrastructures, okay, through these information flows, but it might not be light as we used to know it. It might be changing radically. The other thing that's really important is that most of the claims for smart lighting that we got from most cities had absolutely nothing to do with responsiveness, with the way in which light responds to information. It was real, not in terms of dynamic lighting as we've been talking about here. It's really been about the, as I say, efficiency and cost gains for maintenance, repair, and testing. Okay, that's what most cities were concerned about. So it's simply knowing when the bulbs have broken. Okay, it's not dynamic lighting in it, as we've been talking about it. Now, within that, there's a very wide variation, and this is what we've focused a lot on. And it's really depressing, okay? It is really, really depressing. I don't have a figure yet. We're not at that kind of number stage, but I would say something like 90% of the cities we've been talking to simply talk about smart lighting in terms of technical and engineering efficiency. It's a purely technical thing, okay? You can deliver the kind of light which you are statutorily required to deliver at the lowest possible cost. And that's all it is. And most of that, I mean, I should also say that even the cities, again, because there's most of them, for whom that was really the only important thing, used a very inflated language of things like citizens' needs, sustainability, all kinds of, new democracy, new forms of city management, but that's actually what they meant, okay? It's a very restricted idea of what smart might mean, and to be entirely frank, for most of the cities, what smart lighting actually meant was stick a motion sensor onto at least a pilot project worth of light, with a control system and dim them, okay? Smart lighting simply means dimming. I rush to clarify here. I've got nothing against dimming, okay? You can no doubt save a lot of energy, reduce a lot of light pollution, and so on through that. What's depressing about this was not that people were dimming in a lot of cities, but that was all they were doing. And to say that against the background both of the kind of inflated rhetoric around smart and against the kind of technical possibilities which sitting in this room we might see. Okay? And also setting it against the versions of smart that were articulated in a very few cities, which I would just describe as very advanced in thinking about smart lighting. There were convincing kinds of rhetorics there, not just about appealing to some of the hype around smart, but explorations of the ways in which these relations between light and information might come back to question the whole relationship between many infrastructures, including light, and people's needs and practices in the city. This included really extensive exploration of new forms of citizenship. You know, what are the ways in which cities and citizens communicate with each other, and how is that mediated through the way in which lighting is planned and behaved? Can we explore that? So new forms of citizenship, participation, politics, and governance. And for some of those cities, it really was at the level of rethinking what we mean by a city, particularly not just public realm, but the city as a place that requires certain material fabric in order to carry on. Again, what I'm pointing to here is a huge continuum from a bulk of talk of smart lighting as a very restricted technical thing to a kind of rethinking of the whole nature of the municipal and its governance and its politics. Skip that. Just a few other things from our findings so far to kind of flesh this out a bit. Within that spectrum, one of the other things that really stands out, if you want to think about actually existing smart, what's happening now, is that most of the cities we're talking to feel that they're in a waiting game. There has not been that much done. It's mainly talking about pilot projects, okay? And they are deeply concerned about a whole range of technical and political issues. I've listed a few up here. They feel that systems, standards, technologies, regulations, markets, etc., have not yet stabilized enough for them to take rational decisions about something called smart lighting. Okay? They're waiting until it stabilizes. There are issues of interoperability and so on. Insofar as there's no such thing as pure smart lighting, it usually fits in to a broad, citywide smartening, some description, of infrastructure. How do you get at interoperability? How do you get joined up government around infrastructure? Again, they feel we're a long way away from that. So most cities are kind of waiting and at best doing a kind of pilot project. And that's tied to a broader question, which is articulated by some, but not all, which is the sense that buying into smart or dynamic systems, any of the kind of infrastructure investment that we might be pointing at, is about buying into a social future, which they don't quite understand yet. In some ways, in a very straightforward sense, it means buying or making investments which commit them to many, possibly decades of a particular technical system and the kind of path dependency. So this is such a strategic decision. And that's a political context for smart or dynamic lighting in those places. One of the ways in which that issue comes out very, very strongly amongst a number, and this is something that usually comes out in interviews rather than surveys, that's to say, it's what people say in private, is a deep concern about, okay, smart looks great, it promises a hyper-efficient responsiveness of infrastructure to citizen needs, blah, 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 but it also means investing huge amounts of money in technical systems, which at the moment are largely provided by corporations like Philips and Osram. okay, and a few others. Okay? There's a question here about political and civic autonomy and a lock-in to corporate ecologies, which might last for a very, very long time. At the same time, and a lot of this applies to things like standards as well, control systems and logics, the whole, again, ecology, which the idea of doing smart lighting kind of locks you into. And alternatives don't quite exist yet. It's interesting, the last time I presented some of this was at a Lucy meeting, where there were a lot of small startups with bits of smart on offer. And they look great, and they solve the problem of autonomy. At the same time, it's not a mature market yet, where everything works together. Cities are very, very aware of this. And then there's a crisis of expertise. It's great sitting around here talking about what dynamic lighting offers, but again, with this timescale of complex systems going on for decades, with these kind of shadowy corporate kind of involvements, cities actually don't feel that they are equipped to make these decisions. And that often also means sacrificing their autonomy to another bunch who are the consultants, okay? So again, there's a whole range of issues of trust which are building up. Another couple of issues which I'll like to signal. All the cities we talk to talk about privacy issues and also about commercial ownership of the data they produce and whether they should be allowed to sell in order to raise money for the city, all this kind of issue. It was clear from a lot of people that this is only this is scratching the surface. To talk about privacy is really to choose a headline issue, the one that everyone's talking about. But they're becoming increasingly aware of other kinds of issues. Things like and this is where it comes very much to the sociologist world. If people are talking about control, about different kinds of data to be collected, who decides what kind of data is going to be? Not just what are people going to do with it, but what do we collect data about? What are the strategic decisions about what is important in the world that we should actually measure? And do those decisions, in a sense, democratically reflect what citizens feel to be important about the world and should be measured? Just to give one kind of example, I mean, you know, it's clear, I'm not a technical person, as you probably gathered, but I don't think there are motion sensors that, at the moment, linked to dimming systems that can do much more than measure footfall and distinguish humans, hopefully, from cars and dogs, okay? They don't, on the whole, I don't believe, distinguish men versus women, which might be the most important thing for citizens at night, whether you're a man or a woman walking the street, whether you're a teenager or an old person, whether you are black or white, okay? So again, what if the information we have about the world through smart lighting systems is so reduced so that we edit out all the politically important information, what kind of management, what kind of dynamic interaction between light and society are we going to have? The other issue, which is only just beginning to come out, is it's not just who controls the data or how it's used, it's who has control over the interpretation of that data. Who makes sense of that data? And again, what a lot of cities are asking for is a kind of automated city in which the smart system itself somehow automatically reflects the social world and automatically responds to it. Well, I mean, we all know that's a load of crap. What's in the smart system are algorithms, which are interpretations of the social world. Who controls those interpretations as they're hardwired into the technology or as they're interpreted as data sets when they come out the other end? The other thing that's been interesting is a lot of the surveys and interviews raise the question, if we're talking about smart lighting, what are we trying to be smart about? And that's basically a question of how does smart relate to social goals and values? The deeper sense of what should information further? I've already said that, you know, a lot of it is simply about energy efficiency, cost reduction, sustainability. A very technical sense of, we want a smooth running city at the least possible cost to taxpayers. There's another level at which cities talk about smart should be about establishing safety, security, atmosphere, aesthetics. There's place marketing, economic development, a whole range of things, which are basically traditional. I mean, they've been there for a long time. There's a third level, and I don't like to do these kind of progressive hierarchies, but clearly some of the cities that have thought most about smart are talking about a quite different level, which is the modern city is concerned not just with efficiency or marketing itself, but also with producing inclusiveness, equality, a right to the city, managing multiculturalism and diversity, becoming more enjoyable and playful. I'm not endorsing any one of those values in particular, but that's the kind of language which is coming out. So are there ways of defining smartness in relation to that level of social goals? At the very least, cities are thinking about what level they are linking to. Okay, so SMART gives you a kind of continuum here, or it's certainly our material, between kind of visions of a transformed city and relation between society and technology on the one hand, and incredibly restricted and unimaginative implementations on the whole. It could, and in some places does, raise fundamental questions about social and political processes and our basic kind of concepts of what social and political life in the city is all about. Whether these are realized or not is where the frustration lies. And it could be about making the social diversity more visible, bringing out the complexity of social life, or it can be about reducing that social to very conventional senses of what an algorithm can capture. So it's a very, very mixed kind of view. So I've got a few minutes left. I want to pursue some of those questions through another bunch of studies that we've been doing, which I hope give you a kind of a different take on what we mean by the social here. And in a sense, what some of these ideas of smart are basically missing. And these are two projects we've done, which we finally, for the first 4 years of Configuring Light, we said we're not going to talk about safety or security, because that's all that anyone says about or are concerned about light. If you say light, they say, oh yeah, are we going to feel safe on the street? So we decided not to even mention words for 4 years. Now we've got two projects on safety and security, so I want to talk a bit about those. And the question really that you might want to put to the stuff I'm about to present is, how should light and safety be connected within socially smart lighting? Okay? If you're thinking about dynamically, I don't have answers to this, by the way. If you're talking about dynamically or responsibly lighting in relation to light and in relation to safety and security, what kind of smartness do you need? What kind of knowledge and information are you going to need? Two studies, let's see if I've got time. The first one is called Disconnected Infrastructures, Violence Against Women in Public Spaces in Southern India. It's a project in Kerala with a bunch of geographers at King's College London. And the other one is in Barking, which is a borough of London. Little preamble. I don't think I have to convince everyone here that safety and security, as I say, are the biggest issue in lighting, usually, or after cost as a whole, and cost-efficient delivery. And certainly has some of the biggest impact on lighting decision-making in cities. Is this going to make people feel safer, or on our responsibility to keep our citizens safe? Certainly the biggest issue for the public, and there is a kind of populism of lighting, in which we constantly come across publics demanding more and more and more light on the assumption that is going to make them feel safe, okay? And a failure of the city often is to not light enough in people's eyes. It's crucially important for authorities where the delivery of safety and security, again, is paradigmatic of their duty of care and the thing by which they're usually judged and brought to accountability. And it's a crucial part of any kind of definition to which authorities are accountable for best practice or standards or regulation. At the same time, and I'm not going to argue this out now, it's probably not the time or place, the professional and academic literature on light and safety is, I'll just say it boldly, atrocious, okay? It's embarrassing. In terms of the quality of the research that I've surveyed, it's the ways in which people draw conclusions from that research. I would never stand up here and say that I could make any claim about the relation between light and safety or light and security. I think road safety is a slightly different story. I'll leave that for a moment. Partly this is because so much of that literature is based on an ancient positivist model, which is, can we isolate the impact of light as a discrete, independent variable on people's behavior, crime, feeling of safety, and so on, as if we could isolate one thing and trace its impact on behavior. I mean, again, I'm a sociologist, so I would say that. It's also important to say that public understanding of light is minimal. We found this over and over again, that it's incredibly difficult to get people to move on from talking about light as simply it's bright or it's dim. That's a lot of our mission has been to try to advance that kind of public understanding of light. And a lot of this has led to securitization approaches. The safe default option for most cities is to blast the city with light so they are seen to have discharged their duty, their obligation to keep the citizens safe. It's a crude way of putting it, and obviously it's mediated in many, many ways, but that's why I put it as the default position. You can see this, or we've certainly analyzed this in terms of the idea of how the social is erased from the idea of lighting and safe lighting. I've already mentioned one of those, which I'm not going to go into. If people have read the Crime Lab New York report. People read this? No? Okay. Headline news. Increased dosage of light, by which they simply meant brightness, can achieve 39% reduction in crime. Okay? That's the kind of form of the statement. As if it was a direct impact of light on bodies, so that crime won't happen. Now, obviously, we're talking about this happening in complex social housing developments in New York City, okay, where clearly so much more was going on, okay? So again, lighting here is treated not as a kind of, and therefore the kind of variation of light, the dynamics of changing light levels, is treated as a kind of magic bullet. Fire enough light into a housing estate, and you will reduce crime. Rather than treating that as a complex social world in which light may be mediated through all kinds of processes. Second kind of reason why the literature on lighting and safety is so appalling, and why a lot of the kind of social basis for thinking about smart lighting is pretty bad, and I'll just say this very briefly, is that a lot of the work on lighting and safety is based on a shift within criminology from the 1970s, 80s onwards, away from trying to explain crime in terms of, or safety, in terms of complex social processes and a move towards what are called situational approaches, including situational crime prevention. The idea being that one can focus on the immediate situation, that's to say, what are the spatial arrangements of things, and how does that impact, on the second point, the rational choice, the choices, the calculations that potential criminals make in deciding whether or not to commit a crime. Now, this is a very restricted view of what it means to carry out any form of antisocial behavior in a public space. It analyzes it in terms of the immediate situation. Now, in some ways, this is great for designers, because what it's saying is the only thing that matters, and police forces around the world do designing out crime now. Okay, the only thing that matters is making sure that the design of the situation, that public square, is such that a criminal might decide not to carry out a crime. There are more progressive versions of this. Jan Gehl, who I think is fantastic in many ways, is one other version of that, okay? It's a progressive version, but it still says you don't need to look at the underlying causes of crime or the ways in which the situational elements might have different kinds of meaning based on longer histories, social divisions, underlying forces and structures, and so on. You just have to look at where are people sitting, and can they see each other walking by, whether there are eyes on the street. To go back to Jane Jacobs. The issue that one immediately thinks of is there are usually much, much stronger reasons why there are or aren't eyes on the street. It's not just about the design of a particular place. Okay? Anyway, all of this means that there's a very restricted idea of the social. The social ends up as being either edited out completely in the magic bullet approach, shoot light into a situation, or it's edited out because all one's looking at is the immediate spatial situation, if you're thinking about safety. At which point, I'll just speak briefly about one of our projects. It's, as I said, this was a project on violence against women in public spaces, where largely the bit I'm going to talk about was based on long-term ethnographic work as well as lighting analysis of two very low-income enclaves in Kerala, in which we explored, basically tried to get at the full complexity of what was meant by safety or security by women living there, okay? And it's one of those situations where it's almost too good to be true in a perverse way. The two enclaves in Kochi and Trivandrum were absolutely opposite to each other, okay? Safety and security meant different things, opposite things, in those two places, such that you couldn't just look at the situation and come up with a design for both of them, or standards or regulation. You had to understand what made women feel unsafe, what were they feeling unsafe about in those places, and come up with two very different kinds of versions. You had to understand their social world. Very brief, and also I'll just start with this image. This is proudly shown to me by the guy who's in charge of smart lighting for the state of Kerala as part of India's smart lighting program. And he showed me this wonderful, for him, it was a great definition of smart. His definition of smart was not technical. It was a design principle, that smart lighting was about using the best forms of design to address human needs, okay? He then shows me this design which had absolutely nothing to do with the life of the people that I've been studying, okay? It's got things like cycle lanes and footpaths, okay? And responsive lighting where some of the lights, are responding to traffic flows and others to bicycle flows. And others. Again, in theory, it's wonderful. It bore no relationship to anything that was going on. And indeed, as a fantastic design principle, it came from Delhi, and before that, from international regulations, obviously, ultimately from Switzerland. It's going to take 5 more minutes, and I'll try to go through this. One way of presenting the contrast between these two enclaves, and this is where the research went. You'll see here, I mean, it looks a lot better on my screen, but I think you can see here this incredibly bright light, okay? This is a huge mass. It's something like 20 meters tall. It would be part of lighting a football stadium. I mean, it was astonishingly bright. And as we're walking around, you know, it's kind of designers, sociologists, whatever, we say, oh my God, this is horrendous, okay? This really is lighting these people's homes as if they were a prison. You know, it's a prison yard lighting. And in fact, every woman we talked to, and most of the men, said, we love this light, when can we have more? Okay? We absolutely love it. Okay, that was a start. Why? Can we get some kind of articulation of why this is such a good thing? In fact, there were origin myths. Some of the women told us that this light was provided by a Bollywood star who was contributing to the people, okay? So it's literally, I mean, it's so anthropological. You know, it's kind of, it's such a good thing, it has to come from a good place. Some of the people in our research group, you know, working with a whole range of kind of feminist women against violence groups are saying, well, it's got to be because, you know, they feel more safe, they feel more visible, they're more isolated. There's all kinds of things which come out of the kind of traditional view of you know, why women might feel safe here. Anyway, none of that was the case. The main reason why women gave us for why that light was so fantastic was we can see who is there in that place, okay? And we can distinguish our people from outsiders, okay? It's absolutely central to this sense of security. And this came from the fact that it was not just a homogenous community, they not only knew each other, an unhealthy number of them were related to each other. I mean, I went from house to house, from, you know, aunts to uncles to nephews and so on. So all this was about a community which knew each other so well that they could police themselves if they could identify each other. So what they were looking for was clarity of light. We did a little work changing the light bulbs in people's houses and using different kinds of bulbs to see which properties of light they actually experienced. And at first I just said, oh, we love that mass because it's so bright. Eventually, we were able to isolate the fact that actually the word they always used was clarity. And what that was about was a kind of CRI, quality of light, the positioning and so on, which allowed good facial recognition. It wasn't just brightness that they were after. But the other thing that was really important, why did they want to see our people versus outsiders? They didn't feel unsafe themselves. All of the women said they felt quite safe in that public space. They felt desperately unsafe at home. That's where the violence happened. And they felt unsafe when they left the enclave, but not in the public space of the enclave. What they were worried about was the safety of their husbands and sons, and that's what dominated their security concerns. And the underlying belief was that alcohol, drugs, fighting, everything, all of it, basically, this is the border of the enclave, and there are the young men standing there, okay? That's what they're concerned about. At the barrier, at the perimeter, drugs and alcohol and bad influences exchanged, okay? Now, I'm belaboring that just to underline the fact that if you're trying to get the social and what light should dynamically respond to, that took some work, okay? That means understanding what safety and security means to those women. And so much of the answer to that question was counterintuitive. It is not what we expected. At which point, I'm going to underline that by saying, again, that and one other point, which we hadn't, and that the other people involved in the project, including our Indian partners from Delhi and from Kerala, they smudged together in talking about women and violence, or violence against women, safety and security. Now, what was really clear in Trivandrum, and this was crucial to the lighting, was that women were not concerned about their own security. As I explained, they were interested in recognition on behalf of their sons and husbands. They were very concerned about safety in the sense of just being able to walk down narrow passageways and not step in shit or mud, and to have the paths they took through their enclave recognized by light, supported by light. Okay? So safety and security were two very different issues, and their lighting demands went in opposite directions. Okay? The mast was great for security, what they counted as security issues. For safety, they wanted very specific routes lit so that they and their kids could actually make their way down them. Again, this took some fine-grain analysis. Very briefly, in our other field site in Kochi, the situation was pretty much the opposite in every way. It was the same in some ways. They were very focused on men, drugs, alcohol, and fighting, as I've said, and on policing borders, but the context was totally different. For the women in the Kochi field site, they believe that public space in the enclave is the most dangerous place they could be. They feel much more safe at home and in the city outside, but in the public space in their enclave, they felt so much in danger that there were actually very few women there. Any family, however poor, if they could, sent their daughters and wives out of the enclave to live with relatives in other areas. Why? I could go on for many more hours. I won't. I'll stop with a simple punchline. One of the main differences here was, whereas that first field site I've described as a very homogeneous community which could police itself, this one was deeply divided between two ethnic communities, Tamil and Malayali, also with huge caste differences. The incoming Tamils, even though they'd been there for several generations, were rubbish pickers. They were from a caste which was deeply taboo. They didn't communicate with each other very much, and they were in a state of mutual suspicion. Okay? Lighting public spaces there for facial recognition would have been totally counterproductive. Okay? And we got that from women endlessly. We don't want to go into those spaces. What they do want was lighting which would, as it were, assert their right to be in particular places safely. Okay? So, for example, they have to go out and collect water from water taps. Those need to be lit. Okay? So they are acknowledged as public places, not public squares. Anyway, as I said, I could go on about that endlessly. But the point here is that their understanding of safety, who is safe, who is unsafe, what to do about it, how light should relate to it, was not just different, but actually opposite. I had another story from Barking, which I have overrun, so I won't talk about it. I can talk about it in conversation if people want. The main things to take away from this are fairly obvious, I think. I don't need to belabor them at this point. Social analysis can't be reduced to situational and spatial analysis. I don't know whether every city has the wherewithal, the money, the resources to do the kind of research which is required to understand how light fits into people's sense of safety or security in particular places, but they bloody well ought to do that, would be my argument. We need to choose what light should interact with on the basis of a proper, full social analysis. You can't just look to conventional things. You actually need to understand what is going on in those spaces. That immediately raises the question of what do we do about things like standards? How do you, if we'd given the same lighting solution to those two places, it would have been potentially disastrous, okay? The question is, how do you retain that kind of respect for the local, for how social lives work here, and at the same time be able to generalize sufficiently to carry on professional practices. And the final thing is that one's hope for the very idea of smart or dynamic lighting is to make the kind of the social more transparent, more visible, not less. are the ways that the information that we use and respond to within dynamic or smart lighting, can it be used in a way that actually makes social relations more visible to us, make us think more about how we live and the kinds of concepts that we use to manage our infrastructures. The idea of smart, and I go back to my guy in Delhi and his wonderful elevation of a road that doesn't exist. Smart systems shouldn't automate or speak for a social and political life, again, which doesn't exist. They should actually be used to generate more questions, more politics, more dispute, and more social life. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah.